How did I end up here? Lying in your arms, watching city lights and the stars.
If there's one thing that's unfortunately synonymous with the Smash Bros community, it's the discourse surrounding new fighters, which is something that's been extraordinarily prevalent during Smash Ultimate's lifetime. It's rather odd when you think about it. With a game that came with around 75 characters at release, why would any new addition to a larger-than-life roster be contested in any way? Well, the community sure found a way, complaining how new additions were wasted slots, a sentiment that I do not agree is relevant in any sense, or by saying, who asked for this, completely undermining the true relevance of said character, or because they themselves don't know who they are. And that last point applies here a lot, actually. In the two fighter passes, we've had the additions of Terry Bogard from the Fatal Fury series, and Kazuya Mishima from the Tekken series, two fighting game series that have quite a legacy behind them, and are staples of the fighting game community. And on top of Ryu and Ken from Street Fighter, that makes 4 FGC characters now in Smash. There was a weird argument recently that there were too many fighting game characters in Smash Ultimate. You know, a fighting game. I won't say who spawned this argument, but if you've been on Smash Twitter within the past couple of months, then I'm sure you know what I mean. But that aside, with what appears to be a lack of education and critical thinking for some, I think it would be fun and interesting to look back on these iconic fighting game characters because, sure, I'll be honest, while I'm familiar with said characters by name, in a couple of these cases, I have always known very little about them. So as we take a deep dive into these characters and their series legacies, this is not only going to be a video that will educate me during the research process, but maybe will also teach you something. 2 birds with 1 stone, as they say. Besides, someone's got to educate this community, as if others haven't relentlessly tried to do so before, including Masahiro Sakurai himself in his fire presentation videos, which it's going to end up being redundant, isn't it? Oh, if you're wondering about Min Min, with her being from a fighting game and all, I won't be covering her or ARMS. See, ARMS is not really considered a fighting game in the community, and even when subgenres are taken into account, ARMS doesn't fit into any of them, so that's why. But, without further ado, let's begin. Starting with the Street Fighter series reps in Ryu and Ken, their series is probably the most well known out of the 3 fighting games represented in Smash Ultimate. The series has been around for just over 34 years now, with the original game releasing in 1987 for arcades. Later, however, it was released onto consoles such as the TurboGrafx CD, as well as home computers, but rather than retaining its Street Fighter name, it was released under the name of Fighting Street for whatever reason. I guess to make it sound cool or something, as if Street Fighter wasn't enough, but honestly, I think it just sounds silly. Designed by Takashi Nishiyama and Hiroshi Matsumoto, it's a lot simpler than future installments, extremely bare bones in fact, in terms of actual gameplay, being all button mashy, rather than requiring any actual thought behind your attacks. Story-wise, you take control of the man himself, Ryu, and take part in a worldwide martial arts tournament and attempt to claim victory against 10 other opponents from different countries. This game pretty much set up the groundwork for the series' story going forward. But good lord, that's all it has going for it. But, you know, no one's playing it today. It's more of a relic to look back at to see where the series started, really. And from what we know nowadays, Fighting Street was quite a humble beginning. For a lot of people, where the series truly began was with Street Fighter 2 in 1991, with the subtitle of The World Warrior because, sure, I guess it sounds cool. Street Fighter 2 was a major step forward for the series, improving on everything that Fighting Street implemented, including the use of special command-based moves, an actual combo system, a 6-button configuration, and the inclusion of more characters that aren't just Ryu. Okay, well, Fighting Street did have more than one character, the second being Ken Masters, but he was only playable in multiplayer, and good luck finding anyone to play Fighting Street with nowadays. But anyway, a lot of the beloved Street Fighter characters were introduced here, such as Chun-Li, Zangief, and the character that invokes PTSD for any veteran Street Fighter player, Guile. Being a huge success for the series, Capcom, the series publisher, sought to capitalize on this success and began releasing updated versions of the game, a practice that they are still doing today with the series' most recent edition, Street Fighter 5. The first updated version was known as Championship Edition, which was released for arcades in March of 1992, and the updated version releases continued up until Hyper Street Fighter 2, originally released for PlayStation 2 in 2003. Now okay, Hyper Street Fighter 2 was released to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the series, as it wasn't just Capcom writing 2 success for that long. Between the time of Street Fighter 3's release in 1997, Capcom published sub-series for Street Fighter, named Alpha and EX in 1995 and 1996 respectively. Alpha was heavily influenced by the series' animated movie at the time, Street Fighter, the animated movie, always good to be on point on naming I guess, with the settings and character designs being key indicators for this. Alpha's contribution to gameplay improvements came in the form of expanding upon the super combo system that Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo introduced, extending the super combo meter to 3 levels, allowing for them to be kept for later. Alpha also introduced Alpha counters and Alpha combos, both of which were originally from Darkstalkers, another 2D fighter. In the case of EX, this was the series' transition into 3D. There's not too much to say about the EX series, other than it combined the already established cast with original characters both created and owned by Aroka, a company that was founded by the planner of Street Fighter 2, Akira Nishitani. A couple of these characters include Skullomania and Blair Dane. I want to slot this in here real quick, but Akira, the company and not the character from rival schools, is actually responsible for other Capcom published series, such as the Everblue series and the Card Captor Sakura series, so yeah, I don't know, I just thought that was pretty cool. And prior to Street Fighter 3's release, there was a crossover between characters from the X-Men series of Marvel Heroes and the Street Fighter Alpha games, known as X-Men vs Street Fighter. When Street Fighter 3 was released in 1997, it made an interesting change in getting rid of most of the previous cast, only keeping Ryu and Ken in favour of new characters. It was subtitled New Generation after all. However, some of these characters are pretty beloved, such as Dusty and Alex. Probably the most important feature that Street Fighter 3 introduced was a technique known as parrying, where with the right timing you can cancel out an opponent's attack and protect yourself. It's kind of like blocking, but you take no damage at all and the enemy is left vulnerable for a short time. Following Street Fighter 3, there were 2 more versions released, aptly named Second Impact and Third Impact. The former made some minor changes to gameplay and added 3 characters, including the returning Akuma, while the latter added 4 more characters and brought back Chun-Li. And then following Third Impact's release in 1999, the series kind of went quiet for the next 9 years. I say kind of because, of course, there were a number of crossover games released in that time that featured Street Fighter characters, such as Marvel vs Capcom 2 in 2000 and Capcom vs SNK in 2000, as well as Capcom vs SNK 2 in 2001. Though not a fighting game but a tactical role-playing game instead, Namco x Capcom released in 2005 for the PlayStation 2, exclusively for Japan. Yeah, a real shame considering the roster of characters in the game, but nevertheless, it features Street Fighter characters like Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li and Cammy along with others. Crossovers notwithstanding though, the main series of Street Fighter went quiet up until Street Fighter 4 was released in 2008, over 8 years since Third Impact's release. Street Fighter 4 was intended as a direct sequel to the Street Fighter 2 games, more specifically Street Fighter 2 Turbo. 4 features the return of the original cast of the 12 World Warriors, along with Akuma and the addition of 4 new characters. Along with various gameplay additions such as focus attacks and ultra combos, the most noticeable new thing about Street Fighter 4 compared to the previous entries is the new art style. Previously, Street Fighter used pixel sprites for the models, but in Street Fighter 4, while the gameplay is still in 2D, it features these honestly beautiful 3D cel shading graphics. Cel shading is a rendering process that makes 3D graphics appear flat, just so you know. To add to that, the visuals are heavily inspired by Japanese inkwash paintings, or Sumei paintings as they're known, and it all just looks really good. The visual flair is just amazing. Once again, there were a couple of updated versions in the form of Super Street Fighter 4 and Ultra Street Fighter 4, arguably the definitive Street Fighter experience. As you would expect, the updated versions tweaked various gameplay aspects and added new characters, the most memorable of whom included Yuri and Poison, at least in my opinion. And no, not for any specific reason. Jokes aside, in the case of Poison, she's a notable mention because she originally debuted in Street Fighter Cross Tekken, a game we'll be talking about later in, well, the Tekken part of this video. Just over 2 years after Ultra Street Fighter 4 was released, Street Fighter 5 was released in 2016 in a largely unfinished state and a scuffed art style that makes the characters look like they're made out of Play-Doh a lot of the time. There really isn't a lot to talk about regarding Street Fighter 5, but 2 updated versions were released, the first in 2019, Street Fighter 5 Arcade Edition, and then Championship Edition in 2020, which was actually just DLC, progressively adding new characters, eventually bringing the roster to 40 total characters. Which, while not the biggest roster in the series, just 4 behind Ultra Street Fighter 4's roster, it is still considerable. All in all, Street Fighter's batting average for its main series in terms of game quality is really good. Sure, maybe Street Fighter 5 didn't receive rave reviews and still kind of isn't like 5 years later, but one blunder amongst a sizable number of successes is to be expected at some point. But there's also mere peanuts in regards to the legacy of Street Fighter. I mean, you don't just sell 46 million units for no reason, right? And aside from the games, Street Fighter features in a number of other pieces of media, whether that be in animation, live action movies, comics, manga, and a whack-a-mole game. Yeah, that's apparently a thing. And with a legacy like that, it makes sense that Street Fighter is represented in Smash Ultimate, a game that's pretty much a Hall of Fame for video games at this point. I sound like I'm about to end the video, but no, you can see them in time. we aren't done yet. We've still got 2 more to cover, starting with Terry Bogard and Fatal Fury. When it comes to Fatal Fury, it may be lesser known compared to Street Fighter, but it's still one of the most iconic video game fighting series there is. And if Sakurai himself couldn't get this across to you in his 40-minute fighter summary of Terry back in 2019, well crap, good luck to me I guess. But anyway, Fatal Fury is a series that has been around for almost 30 years now. In fact, it celebrates its 30th anniversary in November, on the 25th to be exact. The series originated on the Neo Geo in 1991, which is a cartridge-based arcade system and a home console system, as a part of the 4th generation of video game consoles. Releasing under the name Fatal Fury King of Fighters, published and developed by SNK, it's notable not just for being the first game in the series, but also because it's where the moniker of King of Fighters originated, a fictional tournament akin to Street Fighter's World Tournament, and served as the basis for the eventual King of Fighters games, which we'll get to. Structure-wise, it follows the same formula that most fighting games did at the time, pitting you against opponents in a best-of-3 format. But for as formulaic as the original may seem, a really notable aspect about it was the implementation of what's known as 2-lane battles, which means you fight either in the foreground or the background. Dynamic stages implemented in this way are nothing new nowadays, but at the time, it was really such a novel concept. And fun fact, the game was actually designed by the creator of the original Street Fighter, Takashi Nishiyama, of which he envisioned it as a spiritual successor, so that's pretty cool I must admit. And while Fatal Fury gets compared to Street Fighter a lot, they differ in their focus, with Street Fighter focusing more on combos, while Fatal Fury focuses more on the actual timing of things, like special moves, and puts a larger emphasis on story. As well as being the debut for Terry Bogard himself, the original Fatal Fury also included the debuts of other recurring characters in the series, such as his brother Andy Bogard, and the main antagonist of the series, Geese Howard, but he was only a CPU at the time. Between the time period of 1991 and 1999, 10 games of the Fatal Fury series were released, the final being Garrow and Mark of the Wolves, also for the Neo Geo. In fact, other than 3 of the 10, all were exclusively released for the Neo Geo, later of course being ported to other consoles. Those 3 that weren't exclusive were Real Belt Garrow Densetsu Special, Dominated Mind in 1998 for the PlayStation, Fatal Fury Wild Ambition in 1999 for the Hyper Neo Geo 64, and Fatal Fury First Contact in 1999 for the Neo Geo Pocket Color. But before all of those, Fatal Fury 2 was released in just over a year later in 1992, and the most notable thing about it are the characters that were introduced here. First is Kim Kafwan, who was the first user of Taekwondo in the series, and the first Korean fighter in fighting games ever, and that's one hell of a legacy in and of itself. And second is Mai Shiranu, one of SNK's mascots, and one who I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, but maybe for the wrong reasons. Enough said. But Mai's certain appeal aside, both characters went on to frequent the Fatal Fury series and became mainstays for the future King of Fighters series. Following Fatal Fury 2, Fatal Fury Special was released in 1993, and is an updated version of 2, implementing gameplay changes and adding new characters, a standard practice in hindsight. Then, in 1995, Fatal Fury 3, Road to the Final Victory, what a name, released, and in terms of the changes and or new additions, the 2-lane battle stages that were introduced in the original were redesigned to now have 3 lanes, which was known as the overway system. Primarily, you fight in the middle lane, but you can fight in the other 2 by moving into the sway lines that you can see in the foreground or background, depending on which lane you are in of course. Other various inclusions included improved jumping control, blocking attacks while mid-air, and a new combo technique known as combination arts, allowing you to cancel various combos to then transition into another combo set. This, of course, varies by the character being played. Real Belt Fatal Fury released next in 1995. Real Belt changed the control of the series, reducing button usage from 4 to 3, making it a little more user-friendly in a way. It also introduced the Power Gouge, a pretty familiar concept to anyone who's played a fighting game before, but it fills up as the player performs normal or special techniques, and upon doing so, it allows the player to pull off various special techniques depending on how much is filled up, the likes of which include guard cancels, a super special move, or hidden ability, which is a more powerful version of a super special move. In 1997, Real Belt Fatal Fury Special was released and is similar to Fatal Fury 2 Special, in that it's an updated version of the previous game, and along with various gameplay tweaks and updated graphics, it also removed the 3-lane system that Fatal Fury implemented, returned to the 2-lane system before then, so I guess it wasn't very good. Real Belt Fatal Fury 2, The Newcomers, then released in 1998 and returns to the fighting system that the original Real Belt used, while also improving upon the 2-lane system from the Real Belt Special, now making it so the player is forced to fight in lane 1, while Lane 2 is used for dodging, adding a more strategic element to the fighting system. Finally, skipping straight to Gallo and Mark of the Wolves, because I already kind of covered the 3 games in between Real World Fatal Fury 2 and this one. Mark of the Wolves was released in 1999, and at the time of this video, it's the last game in the Fatal Fury series, so yeah. The series has kind of been dormant for almost the past 22 years. Unfortunate really, but seeing as King of Fighters is so successful for SNK now, with a new one going to be released in early 2022, I guess its presence nowadays would be pretty redundant. But anyway, with Mark of the Wolves, the 2-lane battle system was removed in favour of more focused gameplay. What Mark of the Wolves did add, however, was the Tactical Offense position, or TOP for short. How this works is when the gouge reaches a certain point, the character will enter what's known as TOP mode, allowing the player to perform certain abilities, whether that be a TOP attack, gradual life recovery, or increased attack damage. Think of it like, I don't know, Dynamaxing from Pokemon? Yeah, let's go with that. It also introduced the Just Defense system, which was a system that rewarded players for successfully blocking their opponent's attacks at the very last second, granting them with a small bit of health recovery for doing so. It's a risk-reward type system basically. Interestingly enough, this system would later be used in Capcom vs SNK 2 in 2001 in the Formula K group, which sounds like something out of a dancing game, I don't know. I said that Mark of the Wolves was the last release for the Fatal Fury series, but it's not like it's been totally radio silent. See, in 2005, the KOF illustrator, Falcon, did mention that a sequel was in production and was even around 70% done, and then in 2006, SNK reported they were still working on it. But in 2008, in an interview with SNK's US developers, they stated that there was no concrete schedule for the game, which I think is another way of saying the game's stuck in development hell. However, 8 years later, in 2016, SNK actually revealed the cast of the sequel to Mark of the Wolves, which was a huge step forward, but unfortunately it's been silent ever since. One can only hope they're focusing on the development, but as I mentioned earlier, with how King of Fighters is SNK's prime fighting game series now, they likely don't see a place for Fatal Fury nowadays, which is fair enough and understandable honestly. However, even if the main series itself isn't around anymore, its legacy does live on in a number of other ways, whether that be with characters featured in series and games like the King of Fighters series, Metal Slug, Dead or Alive, and even Tekken, or, of course, in the form of Terry Bogard in Smash Ultimate, easily the most recognizable character in the series besides, well, but, you know. I'll admit, prior to Terry's reveal as a part of Ultimate's Fight Pass 1, I don't think I'd ever heard of Terry Bogard or even the Fatal Fury series as a whole, but from what I know now, thanks to the research I've done for this and for Sakurai's presentation of Terry, where he ran through the series history, I have major respect for both of them now. And hey, Terry is also like super fun to play in Ultimate, so yeah, that helps. But that leaves us with the final FGC rep, Kazuya Mishima from the Tekken series, arguably the most intimidating character on the roster. Let's begin. I'm going to approach this one differently, but with that said, out of the 3 FGC games represented in Smash Ultimate, Tekken is the most story-centric one. Tekken is an arcade fighting game series developed and published by Bandai Namco, and as mentioned it's a very story-driven series that follows the events of the King of the Iron Fist tournament. Sure, it's just another tournament storyline, but tournaments are cool, stop complaining. Okay, so there's actually a lot more to it. The tournament is hosted by the Mishima Zaibatsu. Zaibatsu is a Japanese term for a business conglomerate, where the opportunity to gain control of the company is the prize, and it's the conflict of the Mishima family itself that serves as the main focus of the series, but it also does expand upon the motivations of other characters for wanting control of the company, so for a fighting game, it's a surprisingly deep plot. The Tekken series is also probably the most brutal of the 3 FGC games here, focusing purely on hand-to-hand combat that includes the expected stuff like throws and blocks, but also escapes and ground fighting. The combat feels super real, which is why it feels the most brutal. And to add to that, whereas other fighting games have buttons dedicated to certain moves, Tekken has a control configuration where each button is dedicated to each limited character, making it easily the most in-depth fighter in terms of control. Of course, later games did implement standard fighting game mechanics like combos and special moves, really bringing Tekken to new heights in terms of its gameplay, with Tekken 2 and Tekken 3 being considered as landmark titles, both of which set the groundwork for future Tekken titles, with them largely sticking to the formula introduced there. In total, there are 10 mainline entries in the series, 3 of them not being officially numbered entries, these being Tekken Tag Tournament in 1999 for the Namco System 12 arcade board and the PlayStation 2, Tekken Dark Resurrection in 2005 for the Namco System 256 arcade board and PlayStation Portable, and Tekken Tag Tournament 2 in 2011 for the Namco System 369 arcade board and the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 and Nintendo Wii U. The series itself is close to 27 years old, with the original Tekken initially releasing for arcade systems in 1994, and the most recent release being Tekken 7 that had a limited arcade release in 2015. And yes, I do feel old after learning that it was initially released over 6 years ago, when I was under the impression it was initially released in 2017, don't mind me. On the note of the series being close to 27 years old, did you know that at the time, the original Tekken was credited as being the first fighting game with 3D graphics? Sure, they haven't exactly aged well, but that's quite the accolade for the series. It's also credited for raising the standard for fighting games as a whole, so yeah, another noteworthy accolade. Tekken 1 is also the game to introduce many of the mainstays of the series, including the mascots of the series in Heihachi Mishima, and, of course, Kazuya Mishima. In terms of its legacy, yeah, it's really got a lot going for it. For example, have you ever heard of Pokken Tournament? A pretty underrated game in my opinion, one that combines the various fighting elements of Tekken with Pokemon. Yeah, a 3D Pokemon fighting game, that's still so wild to me. And for Tekken to cross over with Pokemon, kinda, that's quite the endorsement. Tekken's also crossed over with Street Fighter in the past. Ah, see? I told you I'd mention it later on, and so here we are. As you can imagine, it's a crossover game between the cast of Tekken and Street Fighter using gameplay mechanics of Street Fighter, released in 2012 under the name Street Fighter Cross Tekken. There was another game planned, aptly named Tekken Cross Street Fighter, which would use the gameplay mechanics of Tekken instead, but it never came to be, being shelved indefinitely in 2016. I won't go more into this, but this video isn't for that, so I'm just going to recommend Matt McMuscle's What Happened video on it. It's a great deep dive into the behind the scenes of the game that never was. Seriously, give it a watch if you're interested. Crossover wise, Tekken doesn't exactly have too many of them, but the ones it does have are noteworthy, so quality over quantity I suppose. Over the series history, Tekken has sold more than 50 million units. That's more than Street Fighter at 46 million, making Tekken one of the best selling video game franchises and the third best selling fighting game franchise in history, behind Super Smash Bros. And Mortal Kombat, and that's not something to scoff at. Tekken's legacy is legendary, and while I didn't go as in depth as I did with Street Fighter or even Fatal Fury prior, I hope what I have brought to your attention has convinced you of such. And with a legacy like that, it's no wonder it's now represented in Smash by Kazuya Mishima, a character I'm legitimately intimidated by, and I don't mean fighting against him, though that is pretty terrifying too. I've done my best to cover the legacies of these legendary FGC characters today, and I hope that's shown. I may not be the most in-depth deep dive channel out there, but I try to make my content consumable for a general audience. The worst thing you can do when trying to educate someone on something is alienate them after all. And hey, I even learnt a bunch from doing my research for this, so that's two birds with one stone, a win-win. Just gotta hope the final Fire Pass character is revealed shortly after this video and turns out to be another FGC character, outdating yet another video of mine I've worked so hard on, but fingers crossed? Nah, I'm at peace with the fact. It's basically an unspoken tradition around here.